On va reprendre tout de suite avec un échange entre Braze et Estée Lauder. Ils viennent nous partager leur expertise et la façon dont on peut améliorer l'expérience client. Je vous demande donc d'accueillir Karine Cormier et Nicolas Lincey.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Cormier. I lead sales for our EMEA Global Strategic Accounts team at Braze. If you're not familiar with Braze, we're a customer engagement platform that helps brands drive one-to-one personalized experiences across their digital touchpoints. And I'm joined today by Dan Lindsay from the Estée Lauder Company. Dan, I'm excited to chat with you for the next 30 minutes about unifying the customer experience across channel. Maybe to kick us off, you can give a little bit of background on your role and kind of why this topic's important to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. So yes, I work for the Estée Lauder Companies, which is a luxury prestige beauty house. So we've got about 17 brands that are underneath our umbrella. So the likes of Estée Lauder, Clinique, Aveda, Tom Ford, a real full gambit of brands across skincare, makeup, and fragrance. My specific role is I head up the data insights and analytics function within the UK and Ireland region. So to give a very brief description of what exactly falls under my remit, there's three key areas. The first one is data and analytics. The way I describe that is that that's us trying to understand how the consumer is shopping and how they're engaging today. So I think we're going to get onto it maybe later on about the extensive amount of data that we have within our business. But really, this part of the role is really to understand how the consumers are shopping today, how they're purchasing, how they're shopping between our brands, and then hopefully helping them to guide our strategy going forward. The second area of my function is insights. So I describe this as very much kind of looking into tomorrow. So trying to get our crystal ball out and predict some of the trends of the future. It's a super interesting area of the team because, as you know, we'll probably talk about, the beauty industry as a whole is a super complicated and very, very volatile industry. Every day it feels like there's new brands, there's new trends, there's new subcategories that are coming into play. So our insights function really is about trying to get ahead. A lot of the time, getting ahead of a trend and being first to market gives you a step up on the competition. So that's very much what we do in that area. The third and final part of the team, which I think is very relevant for Braze in particular, is CRM. So that's definitely the activation channel. So the idea is that the insights potentially predict where we're going. The analytics allow us to put some size to the prize, and then we activate through CRM. And it goes without saying, very relevant to this topic, that we operate a very personalized, one-to-one, multi-channel approach to CRM.
Awesome. Let's maybe start with some trends in the industry. Obviously, the beauty industry can be nuanced, lots of changes. So talk to us a little bit about the shifts you're seeing with consumer preferences and how they want to be interacted with.
Yeah, sure. I think in the time that it's going to take me to answer this, I think the trends are probably going to change 3 or 4 times over. That is how it works in beauty, I think. But it's probably good to maybe step backwards and get a little bit of context into what really is the guiding principle of Estée Lauder Companies and how that then shapes some of these trends that we're seeing. So really the guiding principle today is very much the same as what was founded 50 years ago when Mrs. Estée Lauder founded the company. And we oftentimes talk a lot about in our business trying to deliver a personalized high-touch experience. And if you think about it, beauty is an innately personal experience. The products that you put on your face, the shampoo and conditioner that you put in your hair, the fragrance that you put in your body, we are asking the consumers to kind of let us into their kind of personal space. And as such, trust is a big part of everything that we do. How can we convey trust to our consumers? Obviously, the foundation of many of our brands is that we were able to portray trust through years of innovation and years of expertise. Being able to go into a Estée Lauder counter and having an amazing experience with one of the beauty artists there to really have a curated beauty regime that's perfect for the customer. In recent years, like many businesses, however, that trend and how we are able to deliver that high-touch experience has very much changed. I think like most industries, we were very much impacted by COVID and in particular how we are able to deliver that personalized experience. specifically in the UK, as I'm sure it was, as it was all around the world, going through various periods of lockdown and not having that physical bricks and mortar experience to be able to lean on to build that trust definitely meant that we had to pivot our approach. Fortunately for us, and one of the trends that we've definitely seen is the rise of virtual experiences. So for us, virtual try-on, skin diagnostic tools to allow the consumer to have that same high-touch experience, but through their phone or via their laptop. So that was definitely one trend that we've seen continuing in recent years. I suppose the other trend that was super interesting as well was how consumers are shopping the beauty industry and what their regimes are looking like. Again, I'm sure that we all experienced this during the various lockdown periods during COVID. We just had a lot more time on our hands. So many of us used that time to pick up hobbies. I know I baked a few cakes during the time I was at home. But what we saw with the beauty consumer is that they just had so much more time to research and curate this really quite extensive beauty regime. So what we started to see was that more consumers were adding more steps to their beauty regime. So more serums, more toners, more boosters to really create this perfect curated regime for them. Coming out of lockdown and into today, I think that trend has slightly changed because we don't have as much time in our hands. And so what we've seen, it's an interesting paradigm that we call the simplification and sophistication. So because we have less time, regimes are innately getting a lot more simpler. So people have had to kind of drop some of those steps that they introduced during lockdown. But through their extensive research, what we're finding is that the steps that they've retained have just become a lot more sophisticated. So really, really researching and understanding to almost a millimeter what ingredient is being used in every single part of their regime. So for us, we're in this situation where a lot of the time the consumer are as expert as we are, and so how do we kind of still bring our expertise, bring kind of the years of innovation that we have to still be able to deliver that high-touch experience.
Yeah, I think on the topic of trends, I know you had mentioned previously, the emergence of more like D2C brands as part of COVID. Yeah. So as an established brand kind of competing with these brands who have started e-com first. Anything to kind of touch on that point? Yeah,
I think that was definitely another trend that we're seeing. I think it's the barrier to enter the market was just a lot lower. I think again, when you think back about a lot of the heritage that many of our brands was built on was having physical locations in department stores. In London we have amazing locations such as Harrods and Selfridges, and being able to portray your brand in that way. Through the rise of digital, which was very much accelerated through COVID, that barrier has kind of come down significantly, and now you have influencers who are able to build a brand overnight through their millions of followers. And so again, for us, where we feel oftentimes we're able to pivot is because we do have these multiple areas that we can kind of lean on these levers. So we already had a very extensive D2C offering, and as I said, through virtual services, what we were able to do is pivot our attention and pivot our focus to those areas where we saw the market going. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that cross-channel experience. So, I think cross-channel has gone from something that a few years ago was relatively not as common, and today it's quite common. Frankly, it's necessary for any brand who's trying to optimize their marketing strategy. So talk to us a little bit about ELC's journey. What was that cross-communication journey like for your brand?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think, there's within the organization, as I've already said, there's a lot of complexity. We have 17 brands, each of which have hundreds of thousands of SKUs and thousands of points of distribution. The reality is that our consumers are absorbing, seeing, engaging with our brands across all their channels. So almost by default, we operate in a multi-channel marketing strategy. But as you say, we have been on a journey, and I think probably one area that I'd be quite good to touch upon is the journey of how we measure the effectiveness of a multi-channel approach. And I think what we've seen in recent years, or what we've really pushed in recent years, is the rise of things like econometrics and media mix modeling and multi-channel attribution. So for those that aren't aware of what that is, it's the understanding of not necessarily each channel in isolation and what they're driving for the business, but the combination of those channels. And I think most of us in the room that are marketeers will always say that we should look at, we need to look at the big picture and how the channels are working in unison to understand what they're driving. And inevitably, that's what we see through the econometric studies that we do, that a lot of the time, the sum of the individual channels are much greater than the individuals themselves. So I think the rise of that has really helped us to not only show the value of a multi-channel approach, but really actually hone in on the specific channels that are actually driving the return on investment for us. And I think, what's relevant for this conversation is an area like CRM, for example. Consistently, CRM is always one of the most highest driving ROI channels for us. But through extensive reporting and data and analytics, we're able to really deep dive into what specific channels in CRM are the perfect combination to deliver this highly effective multi-channel approach. And again, through Braze and Braze being a fantastic partners, what we've been able to leverage in the last couple of years is moving from a CRM strategy where we focus mainly on CRM to introducing new channels such as SMS, content cards, on-site in-browser messaging, as well as leveraging data feeds into third-party paid media activations as well.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point there around the different channels. What we've seen in the past is a lot of these different channels are owned by different teams. Mm-hmm. So you have an email team, you have a mobile team. A lot of time those teams aren't communicating, so again, the experience is broken for the end customer. Yeah. What's that like at ELC? Have you started to kind of manipulate your teams to mirror the experience?
Absolutely, yes. I think we've been going through quite an extensive transformation within the business, very much driven by data. So it was a 2-year project that is still actually ongoing. It continues to go on today. A part of that 2-year journey that we've been on was onboarding Braze. We also stood up a CDP during that time and also had a bit of an overhaul of our data and analytics. But I think on the people side of things, I think that's where we also saw that we needed to kind of unify and stop, kind of move away from disparate teams working on different parts of the consumer journey and think of the consumer journey in its entirety. So in the recent years, we've actually stood up a centralized CRM team. So a CRM team that actually sits with me and works across all the brands, who are very much responsible for those kind of overarching strategic approaches. So working with the likes of the Cliniques of the world, the Marques and the Avaidas to build out a CRM campaign that works for their brand, yes, but also adheres to what we think is best practices as far as multi-channel activations go.
That's awesome. So, when we talk about the different channels, there's obviously, the opportunity for a brand to engage on every channel mm-hmm. that's out there, or there's this approach of find what's very bespoke and relevant to them. What's your perspective on that? Should a brand be taking advantage of every channel, or, kind of curate something that's more specific to their needs?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the answer for me is very simple. I think it's absolutely a curated approach. If I bring it into our business and how we operate today, our global president, Fabrizio Freda, often uses a phrase of how we have multiple engines of growth within our business. And the context that it's normally used in is that as a business that is across different brands and different categories, we're able to kind of flex and lever different parts of the business depending on what's going on in the market. So if skincare is booming, then we kind of pivot towards more skincare. If makeup is booming, then we pivot more towards makeup. But I also think that phrase can actually be applicable for this topic as well, in that if we think about our multi-channels and the channels that we can pull, really what we're trying to do is find out what the perfect combination of what levers we're pulling here and there to build out whatever the objective that we're trying to meet. So, for example, to talk about a couple of brands within our portfolio, we've got a brand such as Dr. Jart, which is a fairly new brand within the UK, and so is still, I suppose, in the establishing phase. It's a digital-first brand, and generally the consumer profile is a little bit younger. In comparison, we've got a brand like Clinique, which is clearly a bit more of an established brand. It's got an established footprint within the UK, and therefore the consumer target is slightly different. It wouldn't make sense for us to have one size that fits all. The same kind of combination of multi-channels for Dr. Jart wouldn't necessarily work for a Clinique. Dr. Jart right now are more so focused on lead generation and building up their databases and building up their new customer recruitment. For Clinique, they also already have a very established database, and so for them, their objectives are around driving value, driving repeat rate, and trying to create more loyal consumers in the long term. So what we do is we work with individual brands and identify what their objectives are, and then we build out curated approach to what is that perfect combination of those multiple channel engines that we think is going to deliver that objective for them.
Yeah. Quick question there on that acquisition piece, because I think when we think about customer engagement in CRM, a lot of times we think of post-acquisition. Have you done anything to kind of help generate more leads through CRM?
100%, and then I think I would also, I'd answer that question by, again, kind of referring to the technology and the capability that has been enabled through Braze. So lead generation has definitely been an area that we've accelerated a lot in the last couple of years, be it through sampling. So sampling is a big part of beauty. As I said, how do we deliver that high-touch experience when you can't touch and feel the texture of a product? We do that a lot of the times through sampling. So working with third-party vendors to put their products in the consumer's hands, but obviously in return what we want is their consumer data. So through Braze, we're able to work with various vendors to, yes, distribute the sampling, but importantly, capture the data on the consumer. And at the same time, we're starting to build a profile about who they are, what their interests might be, which are then data points that we can use in Braze to then, for their onward journey. So I think that's one example. I think the other example, which is super exciting for us, is, again, how we start to link in our paid media activation as well. So through the likes of Meta and TikTok, we have lead generation ads. So they are adverts that are served to our target consumer, again, to try and encourage them to sign up to our email communication. Through Braze's functionality and capability, we've been able to build data feeds directly from Meta and TikTok into Braze to allow the brands almost real time to target them, to hopefully engage with them and then send them on a journey to conversion.
Yeah, I think that topic is really interesting as well, with the death of the cookie and first-party data becoming more important. Obviously, for an established brand, sending Instagram ads, doing billboards, like these things will always be relevant. But I think if you're able to kind of test some of your first-party channels 100%. First.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of my boss often asks me what keeps me up at night, and I say the cookie depreciation is definitely an area, because I think it's definitely something that is going to completely turn around how we as marketeers activate in paid media without having the use of third parties to build out those consumer profiles that we've always been accustomed to. The reality is that we're going to have to leverage our first-party data more and more. And again, what I would say is that through Braze, we've been able to already, it was almost one of the first things that we were able to launch was a direct API between Braze and Meta, so that what we're able to do, or what our teams are able to do, is build out these very bespoke, very customized segments of consumers. We obviously know already who they are, we know what brands they've purchased, and we know what products they've purchased. So pushing that information into Meta to then either target them directly through Instagram or Facebook, or build lookalike audiences, so consumers who look like these existing consumers that we want to recruit within our brand. Has always been and remains a core part of how we do paid media now, and I do feel like it's going to just inevitably make a bigger part of our strategy going forward.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about data. I think you've alluded to it quite a bit. Yeah. Obviously, data is necessary. You need good data, you need timely data to drive these customer experiences. How does your team approach data and analytics?
Yeah, I think this is definitely something that I get really excited and energized talking about, because I do think it's just such a point of difference for the Estee Lauder companies within the UK and Ireland, because we have been on a very lengthy journey to upweight our infrastructure and our technology to allow us to collect consumer data across all touch points of the consumer journey. So it really is, an incredible system that we're sitting on, where you can go into a Harrods and you can purchase a Tom Ford fragrance, or you can go to a MAC freestanding store. At both of those different touch points across those different brands, we're able to actually capture the consumer's interactions and their purchases with us. All that information then feeds into our CDP, which is part of the transformation that we started a couple of years ago. And then that allows our team to then understand, well, what is that consumer journey across our different parts of their brand? What did they enter our corporation in, and then where have they gone on to since? So obviously with that type of analysis, we're able to understand things like share of wallet. So how much of the total beauty market do we think that we've got within our organization at the moment? And as I said previously, analytics and insights are only as good as the action. So if we know this information of the existing consumer today, how are we then using that to inform our CRM strategy going forward? So data and analytics is fundamentally at the center of everything that we do. I think particularly when it comes to one-to-one, multi-channel marketing, we don't make any decisions without having the data and analytics to back it up.
Yeah. Would you say that your brands are feeding the data into one centralized CDP? Yeah. Okay, yeah. That, I feel like that's the biggest game changer in being able to cross-sell, upsell, understand a user across your different brands?
100%. It's been a huge win for us as a region, and I would say globally as well. It's an area that we have really committed time and effort into, because we know the value of that consumer data and how it can be leveraged to realize its full potential. And as you say, having that journey across our portfolio of brands of how consumers are shopping is just so incredibly powerful and so incredibly insightful, and it really does shape many of the decisions that we make across the whole business.
That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about a personal experience. Obviously, you've been in this role for some time now, and you've had some experience with these different campaigns. Talk to me a little bit about an example of a strategy where you were either going from single channel to another channel, or maybe it was multiple channels and you were just adding another one to a well-curated mix. Can you talk to us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So I think when thinking about this question, I suppose I'll probably think about the transformation project that I've spoken about already, in that not necessarily that it kind of specifically answers this question, but more so the process that we went on as a business. And the reason I say that is that I think a big part of that transformation project, it was very much based on technology. So yes, it was standing up a CDP, it was onboarding Braze, but more than anything, it was around change management. So how do you convince many stakeholders across the business to change their way of thinking, to kind of move to a new operating model, for example? And I think the approach that we took now is applicable to every single decision that we make going forward. So yes, a big technology transformation project, or moving to a single or a multi-channel approach. So I think my kind of guidance, I suppose, on what worked for us was, I think, first of all, understanding the problem. I think lots of the times when we're faced with big challenge and the big tasks, we go into go mode, we go into action mode, and we start going to delivery before really kind of understanding what it is that we're trying to solve for. And I think what made that project, and what continues to make that project so successful, is how we engage the wider business to understand what's your problem today, and how can this technology, how can this project help you with that? And throughout the project, we kept coming back to those problems to make sure that we weren't kind of veering too far off that journey. And if we were, then we had to kind of check ourselves to kind of get back on the path to delivering on those problems. Once we had the problems, the next step was, okay, well, what's our goal? Where do we want to be? So for this question, it might be moving from a single channel to a multi-channel, but being very clear on what those objectives are, what those goals are, and again, aligning your business on them so that it's a shared goal, it's a shared vision that we're all signing up to do. And I think once we have the problem and the goals, I think then and only then do you start getting into the operating. How do we get there? So what do we need to do? Who needs to be involved? What's the new technology that we need to do? What evidence do we need to put together? And then I think the final step, which I suppose is for this example where we're in today, is the continual iteration. Inevitably, these projects never end. You start out with a kind of an ambition of how long it's going to take, but the project just has to, or the strategy just needs to keep evolving with the times. So for us, continually kind of going back to those goals that we set, testing and learning and tweaking the approach, and keep kind of pointing ourselves into the wind to make sure that we're still kind of focused on those goals. So I think that those are the kind of the four core principles that work for us. And I think if we're talking about how to transform the business way of thinking from single to multi-channel, then I think trying to kind of at least focus on those four areas would hopefully work.
Yeah, I'm curious on the goals piece. Obviously, with a retail brand, driving purchases is probably paramount, but are there other goals that you align on across team?
We do, yeah. Another very exciting project that I'm working on at the moment is something that we call the metrics that matter. And this is trying to evolve our way of measuring success. So as you say, as a retail brand, oftentimes we are reporting on sales. However, as marketeers, we know that there are KPIs and metrics across the full funnel that we are driving. We invest in certain channels, not necessarily expecting to drive sales today, but maybe further down the line. So what are those metrics at that point that measure our success then? So what we've worked on is a very extensive framework across different metrics in media, in the consumer, in profitability, in finance, you name it, and align those across all our key stakeholders, senior stakeholders, kind of middle management, to make sure that everyone was comfortable with those metrics and that they agree that those are the areas of success. And what we've been working on in the meantime is building out dashboards and having various kind of sessions and forums where we can discuss those metrics that matter and start to kind of weave in the story that we're trying to take. So yes, if we're driving this metric top of funnel, what should that mean as a mid-funnel metric? And therefore, what does that mean as far as retail sales? So just trying to kind of get people to think about the importance of data, number one, but then the importance of the different data points and metrics that are relevant across different channels.
Yeah. Awesome. So to wrap us up, I'm sure there's some people in the audience who are on the early start of this journey and are looking to add more channels to their communication. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to them? Are there certain things that they should be aware of in the process, things to watch out for? Would love your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that comes to my mind is testing, and is so vitally important. A phrase that we often use within our business is that you can test and you can fail, but make sure you fail fast and cheap. And I think it's such an important mindset to have, is that you need to test before you ever go on any sort of venture of any significant change management. I think my one piece of advice would be ensuring that your test is small enough to be isolated and not necessarily impact the wider business, but big enough that it's big enough to kind of to get people's attention and to understand what the size of the prize could be. And I think throughout everything that we do, whenever we're moving into a new venture or a new strategic approach, we always have an extensive testing and piloting period. For us, it might be working with one of our brands in particular on one of their subcategories to kind of activate a campaign to understand whether the new approach is actually worked. Hopefully it does. And then we use that as buy-in for the rest of the business to then hopefully scale across all brands and all categories.
Yeah, I think that point of fail quickly and cheaply is really interesting, because especially in this macro environment, if you're going to roll out some campaign that's going to be multi-million dollars, it's important to start on your own free channels. Yeah. If it's going to be an 100%. Ad campaign, start on your website, see what the results are before you're rolling something out.
I totally agree. And again, I think final point on Braze, I think that's again where the advantage that we have with having a partner like Braze and having an extensive owned data channel, that a lot of the time that channel is relatively free, and we can test there. We can try different combinations of messaging, different combinations of channels and creative and call to actions, and try to work out what works. Try it again with a small part of the business if possible, and then use that to build the business case to expand to other parts of the business, and then hopefully start to get into the more kind of pricey paid media activations. Yeah.
Any final words or thoughts?
I think of data and the importance of data. It goes without saying. For us, data really is the oil that fuels our business. And I think for us, the time and the energy and the efforts that we put into not only capturing our data but holding it and using it is just so vitally important to everything that we do. And for me, that leads to kind of many of the successes that I think we've had as a business.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. This has been great.
No, thank you very much.